The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dust-covered floor of the Winscombe auction barn. The smell of hay, old leather, and anticipation hung thick in the stale October air. Most of the crowd had already thinned, boots scuffed against wood, coffee cups drained, conversations winding down into tired murmurs. It was the last horse of the day, and no one expected anything remarkable. Until he walked in. Ashwind. The chestnut stallion stepped into the ring like he didn't belong there. Too proud, too graceful, too aware. His deep auburn coat shimmered despite the dim light, and his eyes scanned the crowd with unsettling intelligence. He didn't flinch, didn't rush. His hooves met the dirt like he'd done this before, but his soul had never agreed to it. There was something ancient about him, something unspoken. No one bid. No one moved. Not until Clara Winscombe saw him. She was leaning against the far end of the railing, flannel sleeves rolled to her elbows, a leather notebook tucked under her arm. Her boots were caked with dust from her own stables, but her heart hadn't felt connected to a horse in years, not since the fire. Clara's expression was unreadable as Ashwind turned his head slowly toward her, ears twitching, eyes locking with hers. It lasted only seconds, but it felt like time stopped. Jonah Merrifield, the auctioneer with 40 years under his belt, cleared his throat. "This here's Ashwind, aged 6, unbroken but sound," he said, his voice less confident than usual. "Starting bid, 1,000. No one responded. Clara's fingers tightened around her notebook. Her pulse roared in her ears. That look, she couldn't shake it. It wasn't just recognition. It was something else. Familiar. Like a ghost had whispered her name. She hadn't planned on buying. She wasn't even supposed to be in town this week. But something in her chest stirred, a weight she thought had died with Eleanor Brierwood's final letter last spring. That letter had mentioned a stallion. A secret. Clara had never followed up on it. Until now. Caleb Dorrance, standing beside her, leaned in and said, "Don't. You can't afford another mistake, Clara." But it was too late. Her hand was already in the air. And in that moment, as Ashwind flicked his ears forward and took a single step closer to her side of the ring, every person still left in the barn, Maeve Holleran, Tobias Redfern, Ruth Ann Vale, felt it. The stillness. The shift. The change. Harlan Vexler, from the shadows near the exit, narrowed his eyes. He recognized that horse. But what Clara didn't know yet was why Ashwind looked only at her. The barn had mostly emptied out by the time Clara stepped into the holding area. The buzz of voices had faded, replaced by the distant hum of a generator and the soft shifting of hooves in straw. Ashwind stood in a corner stall, calmer than she expected for a horse just pulled from the auction ring. He didn't look at her this time. Not yet. His head was low, eyes half-lidded, as if he were waiting for something or someone. Caleb Dorrance followed close behind her, his arms crossed tightly. "You paid over $2,000 for a horse with no papers, no history, no record," he muttered. "What's the plan here, Clara? Gonna save another stray and hope for a miracle?" His words weren't cruel, just tired. They carried the weight of shared mistakes, of half-finished barns and one too many vet bills. She didn't respond. Instead, she stepped closer to the stall door, letting her fingers brush against the worn wood. Ashwind didn't flinch. Clara opened the latch slowly. Her breath caught in her throat as she entered. Up close, the stallion was even more imposing. Strong muscles, healed scars along his flank, and a strange silence in his presence. She whispered his name, more to herself than to him. "Ashwind." His ears twitched and finally he looked at her. Not startled. Not afraid. Just aware. Like he'd heard that name before. Like he had been waiting for her to say it. Back at the truck, she found the small cedar box Eleanor Brierwood had left her. It had sat untouched for months. Clara had never opened it, out of grief or fear. That afternoon, she finally did. Inside were a few yellowed photographs of her mother with horses she'd never met. One, in particular, stood out, a stallion with the same blaze, the same posture. On the back, scrawled in fading ink, were 2 words, Ashwin's sire. Her hands trembled. Eleanor had never talked much about that part of the past. Clara knew her mother had once trained horses for the Redfern estate, but whatever happened there had left her cold and secretive. Ruth Ann Vale, Eleanor's closest friend, once told Clara to never go digging through Brierwood roots unless you're ready for what grows there. She hadn't understood what that meant, until now. As Clara looked back toward the barn, the stall light above Ashwind flickered twice, then died completely. From the darkness inside, she saw the faintest shimmer of movement, his eyes catching the moonlight, still watching her. Silent, knowing. She didn't know it yet, but the truth behind Ashwin's bloodline was about to turn her world upside down. By the next morning, the clouds hung low over the hills like they were carrying secrets. Clara stood outside the barn, hands wrapped around a chipped enamel mug of coffee, her eyes fixed on the trail that led toward the old Brierwood estate. She hadn't been back there in over a decade, not since Eleanor's funeral. Too many ghosts. Too many questions. But now, with Ashwin stabled behind her and that photo burned into her memory, she felt something pulling her there. Or maybe pushing her. Maeve Holleran pulled up in her dusty pickup, climbing out with a notebook in one hand and a skeptical look in her eyes. "You know Tobias Redfern still owns half of Brierwood, right?" she said, slamming the truck door shut. "He's not exactly the welcoming type." Maeve had always been the more grounded of the two. Older by 5 years, sharper in her warnings. If you're digging into Eleanor's past, Clara, tread lightly. That family keeps things buried for a reason. Inside the barn, Ashwind had grown restless. He paced the stall slowly, his head lifting every time Clara's boots echoed on the wooden boards. She'd started noticing the way he moved. Not just like a horse unfamiliar with people, but like one trained to wait, like his instincts were shaped by something more deliberate. She had a feeling Ashwind hadn't just wandered into the auction system by chance. Someone had wanted him hidden. That afternoon, Clara and Maeve drove out to Brierwood. The house was still standing, barely. The shutters hung crooked, vines climbed up the stone like they were trying to take it back. But the barn in the back still held its frame, its silhouette cutting sharply against the sky. Clara didn't go inside right away. Instead, she walked the perimeter, half expecting the air to speak. Eleanor used to say, "A horse remembers things you wish it didn't." They found the old breeding ledger buried under a tarp in the tack room. Dust-covered and brittle, but intact. Clara flipped through it slowly. Names, birth dates, lineages. Near the back, a name caught her breath. Ashwind, Fold 2019. Dam. Belladora. Sire, Sundancer Red. Her heart skipped. She had heard that name before. Sundancer Red. The prized stallion Tobias Redfern claimed was stolen years ago, before disappearing from every registry. The truth hit hard. If Ashwind was Sundancer Red's son, it meant Clara had just bought a horse that should never have ended up at auction, a horse that might still belong, legally and dangerously, to the Redfern family. And if Tobias found out where Ashwind was now, he wouldn't ask for him back. He'd come for him. The knock came just after sunset. It was firm, too firm to be friendly, and echoed through the old wooden frame of the front door like a warning shot. Clara froze mid-step in the kitchen, her hands still on the kettle. Maeve, seated at the table with a map of Brierwood's back pastures spread out before her, looked up with narrowed eyes. "Don't answer that," she whispered. But Clara already knew who it was. There weren't many people in Dorrance County who knocked like that. When she opened the door, Tobias Redfern stood on the porch like a shadow made of bone and steel. The man hadn't aged well, his once proud jaw now lined with bitterness, his eyes cold and sharp like a hawk's. He didn't wait for pleasantries. "I heard you bought a horse," he said, voice low and controlled. Big chestnut. Blaze on his face. Clara didn't answer. Tobias took one step forward. "That horse was stolen from my land years ago. If it's the one I think it is, you're harboring stolen property." Clara's mouth went dry. "There are no papers. No proof. Just a name," she said, trying to hold her ground. But Tobias's smirk told her that wasn't enough. "Names mean more in this town than you think," he said. "And bloodlines? They're everything." Behind him, the sky had darkened to a bruised purple, the kind of twilight that made the past feel closer than it should. He didn't threaten her outright, but he didn't need to. After he left, Maeve locked every window, every door. "You need to move that horse. Tonight," she said. Clara shook her head. "No, I'm not hiding him." But even as she spoke, her thoughts spiraled. If Tobias really knew who Ashwind was, if he could prove the horse's lineage, then this wasn't just a fight over an animal. It was about legacy, pride, and something deeper. Something Tobias was willing to protect at all costs. Later that night, Clara went to the barn. Ashwind stood in the same corner, watching her like always, silent, waiting. She ran her hand down his neck, trying to calm the storm inside her. "You've been through worse, haven't you?" she whispered. "You've seen the kind of man he is." She didn't expect an answer, but the flick of his ears and the way he leaned into her touch said more than words could. What Clara didn't see, what neither of them saw, was the black truck parked at the edge of the tree line, its headlights off. Inside it, Harlan Vexler sat with a pair of binoculars in his lap and a list of names in his glove box. Ashwind was just the beginning. The next morning, Clara found the barn door slightly ajar. She froze. The padlock lay broken on the ground, twisted like it had been pried open with something heavy. Her heart shot to her throat as she ran inside, straw crunching under her boots. But Ashwind was still there, standing, unharmed, but tense. His eyes were wide, flared with fear. He wasn't the same calm, watchful presence from the night before. He had seen something. Or someone. Clara stepped inside the stall carefully. Ashwind backed away, nostrils flaring, muscles twitching beneath his coat. It took several long minutes for him to calm under her voice. "It's okay, you're okay," she murmured, even though she wasn't sure of it herself. She glanced around. Nothing else appeared stolen. No other animals disturbed. Just the lock, violated, and the silence it left behind. She called Maeve. Someone was here last night. Ashwind's scared to death. And I think he remembers whoever it was. Maeve arrived within the hour, along with Jonah Merrifield, the retired auctioneer. He'd heard rumors about Ashwind's bloodline circulating through town, and the name Harlan Vexler had come up more than once. "He used to break horses for the Redferns," Jonah said, lowering his voice as if the barn itself could hear. "But he was never right in the head. Some say he trained them hard, too hard. Broke more spirits than habits." Jonah knelt beside Ashwind, whispering calmly as he examined the stallion's legs, then his flank. There, just beneath the hairline, a faint scar curved like a half-moon. Clara hadn't noticed it before, but Jonah had. "That's from a whip. Redfern's men used to mark the ones they broke the worst," he said grimly. "If Vexler was here last night, he wasn't just looking. He was remembering. Testing if the horse remembered him, too." Clara's stomach turned. Ashwind hadn't just been a valuable bloodline. He'd been a victim. A survivor. She suddenly felt protective in a way she hadn't since her childhood with Eleanor, when she'd watch her mother stand between abused animals and cruel men without blinking. Now, she understood that kind of fire. But this time, the fire had a name. Tobias. And if he wanted Ashwind back, he'd use men like Harlan to do it quietly. That night, Clara found an envelope tucked under her windshield wiper. Inside was a single photograph. Ashwind, younger, in a Redfern training yard, with Harlan Vexler holding the lead rope. On the back, scribbled in smeared ink, "You don't know what this horse did." Clara barely slept. The photo burned in her mind like a fever. Ashwind, young and trembling, in the grip of a man with cold eyes. She'd stared at it for hours, memorizing every detail. The fencing in the background. The worn barn. The faint Redfern crest on the wall. But it was the writing that haunted her most. "You don't know what this horse did." It sounded more like an accusation than a threat. Maeve returned the next morning with an old digital recorder she'd found in Eleanor's storage box. "I wasn't going to bring this up," she said, "but you need to hear it." The file was dated April 3, 2020, 5 months before Eleanor died. As the recording played, Clara's chest tightened. Her mother's voice was weaker than she remembered, but unmistakable. "They're breeding something dangerous, Clara. Not just horses, they're breaking them in ways no one talks about. Ashwind wasn't supposed to survive." Clara pressed pause. Her hands were shaking. "She knew," she whispered. "She knew about him and never said a word." Maeve nodded. "There's more." The recording continued, Eleanor's voice cracking now. "Tobias, he wanted Ashwind for more than shows. Said he was too smart to be just a stud. I told him no. I told him he'd regret it. That horse saw things. Things that never should have happened at Brierwood." Then silence, followed by a single name, whispered like a confession. "Jonah." Clara blinked. Jonah Merrifield? Maeve looked away. They were closer than anyone knew. She trusted him. Maybe too much. Clara's mind raced. Jonah had examined Ashwind, had known about the scar, had recognized Harlan's hand before anyone else. But why hadn't he told her more? What was he still hiding? And why was his name in her mother's final words? Later that evening, Clara drove to Jonah's place, heart pounding the entire way. His truck was parked out front, lights on inside, but he didn't answer the door. She knocked again, harder this time. Nothing. As she turned to leave, she noticed the barn door behind the house hanging open. Clara's instincts kicked in. She walked toward it, slowly, cautiously. Inside the barn, she found it, another photo. Ashwind, again. But this one was different. He was rearing up, eyes wild, a man on the ground beneath him, blood near his head. The back of the photo had only 3 words, barely legible through the smudges. "He remembers everything." The barn was silent, but Clara could feel the weight of the photo in her hands like it had a pulse. Ashwind, rearing, panicked, a man on the ground, blood. The image seared into her brain. But what made her stomach twist was the handwriting on the back. "He remembers everything." She turned in a slow circle, eyes scanning Jonah's dimly lit barn. Why had he kept this? And more importantly, why hadn't he told her? She found Jonah sitting in the old tack room, head bowed, hands resting on his knees. The look in his eyes when he saw her told her everything. He had been waiting for this moment. "You saw it," he said before she could speak. "I figured you would." Clara stepped forward, the photo still trembling between her fingers. "That's Ashwind. And that man, who was it? What really happened at Brierwood, Jonah?" Jonah exhaled like it hurt. "The man in the photo was my brother, Thomas Merrifield. He was Redfern's lead trainer back then. Ashwind was just a colt, smart as hell. But Thomas, he was cruel. He didn't break horses, he shattered them." Jonah's voice cracked, and Clara could see the years weighing down his shoulders. One day, Thomas pushed him too far, cornered him, used the whip. Ashwind fought back. kicked him. The blow fractured his skull. Clara blinked. He killed him. Jonah shook his head. No. Thomas lived. But he never walked or spoke right again. Redfern covered it up, said the horse was unstable, dangerous. Ordered him put down. But Eleanor, your mother, she begged me to help her hide Ashwind. Said he wasn't dangerous, just traumatized. She couldn't stand what they were doing to those animals. So we faked the records. Moved him. Buried the truth. Clara sat down across from him, her thoughts spinning. So Ashwin's been on the run his whole life. All because he defended himself. Jonah nodded. And now Tobias knows he's still alive. Harlan never forgot him. Neither did I. But I kept quiet, because I didn't want you getting pulled into this. Clara looked away, anger bubbling beneath her ribs. Too late. Back at her ranch, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Clara stood outside Ashwin's stall, her heart heavy with what she now knew. He wasn't just a survivor, he was a witness. A soul marked by cruelty and betrayal. And now, everyone who wanted that truth buried was circling back. Because Ashwind remembered. And Clara had just become the only person standing between him and the past that wanted him erased. The night air was heavy, like it knew something was coming. Clouds rolled in slow from the west, swallowing the moon, and the wind carried the scent of distant rain and dust. Clara sat in the dim light of the barn office, staring at a legal document Maeve had dropped off hours earlier. Jonah had signed a sworn affidavit about Ashwin's past, attaching his brother's medical records and Eleanor's old notes. It was enough to start a legal case, maybe even keep Tobias Redfern at bay. But paperwork didn't stop men like him. Ashwind paced in his stall, agitated. His muscles twitched, ears flicked at every sound. Clara could feel it too, the tension in the air, the shift. It was instinct, pure and primal. Animals always knew when a storm was coming. She stepped into the stall, pressed her forehead gently against his, and whispered, "I won't let them take you. Not now. Not ever." His breath was warm against her cheek, and for a moment it felt like they both believed it. But down the road, a pair of headlights cut through the night. They didn't slow at the gate. They didn't signal. The truck rolled straight up the drive and stopped just before the barn. Clara was already moving, slipping the latch on Ashwin's stall and grabbing the rope. Maeve stepped out from the shadows, shotgun in hand. "You still think this ends with a courtroom?" she asked flatly. "Because I don't." From the truck stepped Tobias Redfern, his coat flapping in the wind, his face calm in a way that only made it worse. Harlan Vexler climbed out behind him, eyes scanning the property like a hunter scenting blood. "You've got something that belongs to me," Tobias said, voice low. "And you've got one chance to hand it over before this gets ugly." Clara didn't answer. She simply stood her ground, one hand resting on Ashwin's neck. "You think you're protecting him," Tobias went on, "but you're just prolonging the inevitable. That horse is a liability. He remembers things that could ruin lives." Clara's voice was steady, though her hands trembled. "Maybe some lives deserve to be ruined." Tobias took a step forward. "You're not your mother, Clara." Her eyes narrowed. "No, I'm not. I'm worse, for people like you." Lightning flashed in the distance, just enough to light the field. Maeve cocked the shotgun. "You'll take this horse over my dead body," she said quietly. Harlan didn't flinch. He simply reached for the crowbar in the truck bed. Tobias raised a hand. "Not yet," he muttered, because from behind them, another engine roared up the gravel drive. And the voice shouting from it was one Clara hadn't heard in years. "Nobody touches that horse." The truck skidded to a stop, gravel flying beneath its tires, and the door slammed before the engine had fully shut off. Caleb Dorrance stepped into the headlights like a ghost pulled from Clara's past. His denim jacket was soaked from the storm rolling in, and his jaw was tight with something between fury and fear. "Get your hands off my goddamn niece's horse," he shouted, voice sharper than she remembered. Clara's breath caught. She hadn't seen Caleb in nearly 5 years. Not since the funeral, not since he walked away from the ranch and everything tied to Eleanor Brierwood. But here he was now, standing between her and the men who wanted to erase Ashwind like a bad memory. Tobias Redfern narrowed his eyes, clearly caught off guard. "Didn't expect you to show your face again, Dorrance," he muttered. Caleb didn't blink. "I came back for 2 things, the truth and justice." Ashwind stood behind Clara, snorting, restless, as thunder rolled overhead. For a moment, no one moved. Just the storm building above them and the tension stretching tighter between every breath. Caleb stepped closer to Tobias. "I know what you did. What you covered up. I know what happened to Thomas Merrifield, and what almost happened to my sister when she tried to expose you." Tobias scoffed, but the twitch in his jaw betrayed him. "You don't have proof. I have her journals. Her voice recordings. And witnesses," Caleb replied. "You think this is just about a horse? Ashwind is the evidence you couldn't bury. He remembers the violence. He carries the scars. And now the whole damn town is about to hear the story you tried to kill." Tobias's eyes darkened. "You don't scare me." But Maeve stepped forward, raising her phone with the voice recorder running. "You should be scared. Because this is going public." There was a moment of hesitation in Harlan Vexler's stance, barely visible, but Clara saw it. A flicker of uncertainty. Maybe even shame. When Tobias barked, "Get the horse," Harlan didn't move. He stared at Ashwind, then at Clara, then back at the dirt. Slowly, he let the crowbar fall to the ground. "I trained that horse," he said hoarsely. "But I'm not going to hurt him again." It was over before anyone spoke again. Tobias knew it. His power was in secrets, and now there were none left. He turned without another word, climbed into the truck, and drove off into the storm with nothing but the weight of his failure. The silence left behind felt holy. Clara turned to Ashwind, tears in her eyes. "You're safe now," she whispered. But Ashwind, his ears pricked, his head high, was already looking past her, toward the field Eleanor had once called the place where the healing begins. 1 week later, the field behind the Brierwood barn bloomed in wildflowers Clara hadn't seen in years. Golds, purples, and soft whites danced in the October breeze, like the land itself was breathing again. For the first time in a long time, the past didn't press down on her. It moved through her gently, like the wind through the tall grass. Clara leaned against the old fence, watching Ashwind graze under the open sky. No ropes, no fear, no shadows. The legal case against Tobias Redfern was moving forward. Caleb had returned to town permanently, working with Maeve and the local authorities to sort through the documents Eleanor left behind. The journals, voice recordings, and witness statements were more than enough to reopen the Brierwood files. Harlan Vexler had turned state's witness, offering to testify in exchange for leniency. Justice wasn't swift, but it was beginning, and this time it was in the open. Ashwind had changed too. His restlessness had faded, replaced by something deeper. Stillness. Trust. He followed Clara now without hesitation. No lead rope needed. They had built something fragile but real, a bond forged not by training, but by truth. She'd begun working with other rescued horses, using Ashwind's story to help teach others about healing, patience, and the quiet power of listening. One morning, as fog rolled off the hills and dew clung to the fence posts, Clara opened the small cedar box Eleanor had left her all those months ago, for real this time. At the very bottom, beneath the photos and receipts, was a folded note, yellowed with age. In her mother's careful handwriting, it read, "If you find him, love him. He will carry your burdens like he carried mine. Clara pressed the letter to her chest and smiled through tears. She understood now. Ashwind wasn't just a horse her mother saved. He was family. By spring, the old Brierwood stables had been restored, renamed Ashwind Haven. Children came to learn. Veterans came to heal. Broken animals found new beginnings. And in the center of it all was the stallion who had once been marked to disappear, now standing proud, whole, and no longer alone. As the sun dipped behind the ridge and the day gave way to soft twilight, Clara walked out to the pasture one last time. Ashwind lifted his head, ears forward, eyes steady. She reached out, palm open, and he met her halfway. There were no more words to say. Just breath, presence, and the quiet knowing that sometimes the ones we save are the ones who save us.